It's time for Supply Chain Now Radio, broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Supply Chain Now Radio spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
So good afternoon. Scott Luton here with you live on Supply Chain Now. Welcome back to the show. Today's show, we're coming to you live from Las Vegas, home of the Reverse Logistics Association Conference and Expo, which really has become the center of the universe for returns, all things returns and reverse logistics. Ton of thought leaders, including some drillers and some other construction good people that are setting up a ton of booths in the exhibition hall. We've got keynotes coming up. We've got a ton of networking opportunities, a ton of best practice sharing. Today's episode is really important, brought to you by Capgemini, global leader in consulting, technology services, and digital transformation. You can learn more at capgemini.com. Quick programming note, you can find our podcast wherever you get your podcast from, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast from, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Well, you may have heard him already chime in. He's chomping at the bit today. My fearless co-host, Greg White, serial supply chain tech entrepreneur, chronic disruptor, and trusted advisor. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. It's great to be here.
It is outstanding to be here on what is an unexpectedly cold week in Vegas, 40 degrees and windy.
Yeah,
right?
It's a little chilly here in Vegas, but you know what, Tony Sciarrotta? He's going to heat things up.
Nice.
You know, I'm telling you, what they're doing with RLA is it's important.
Yes.
Tony's a visionary. I mean, you know, it's not just about what do we do when it comes back. It's how do we keep it from coming back in the first place. That's so important. And, you know, commerce is changing. You know,
vastly.
55% of consumers say that they will return a product and prefer to do so in a physical location. So I think it's great that we're talking to Sean, who we're going to intro. I know. I pre-introed.
Throwing me some curveballs today.
Yeah, there you go.
Greg White. But he mentioned our featured guest here today, Sean Magann, Sims Recycling Solutions.
Yes.
Thought leader in the space, big supporter of the RLA, one of the top sponsors here, that allows us to bring all these folks from across the world of reverse logistics here to exchange best practices and ideas and solutions to old problems and new problems that you're referring to in this retail, in the supply chain and retail space that's evolving by the minute, right?
Yep.
So good afternoon, Sean. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to speak with me today. It's exciting.
Yeah. Well, we're excited. You come well regarded. Your ears may have been burning in recent days as we were kind of building our interview lineup, and Tony was talking about how good of a guest you'd be for the show.
Well, I appreciate that.
So we're looking forward to diving right in. And really, we're fast starters, right?
Yeah.
No further ado, we're going to dive
Let's
right in because I'm jealous to hear about where you're from and born and raised. And I think our listeners will kind of enjoy getting a sense of who you are, where you're from. And you got to give us the goods on your upbringing. So give us a few anecdotes on as Sean grew up.
You bet. Well, I'm born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area in a town called Fremont. I went to school at UC Berkeley. I live currently in Pleasanton, so I live not too far from where I grew up.
Okay.
I travel the world for work, but the Bay Area is a pretty cool place. It's hard to leave. Anecdotes about how I got into the business. You talked about growing up.
Yes.
So I went to
give us the goods on that first.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So I went to Catholic high school, right? So where everything was very regimented. We wore uniforms. And then for college, I go to UC Berkeley, which is a school where some people didn't even wear clothes, right? So it was quite a shock. But, you talk about a culture shock. But so that was always interesting.
What did you major in at UC Berkeley?
I was a history major, and I got an MBA after.
Really?
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So it's history, reading about history, and is that part of a passion for you?
Well, I wanted to go to law school. My original intent was to use it to go to law school, but I felt business was better, so I went and got an MBA instead. But I'm still a big reader of history, and I enjoy it.
So San Francisco, that Bay Area, is known for a variety of things: food, wine, weather. what is one thing that when you get back from your global trips abroad, and I know you stay maybe live in an airplane sometimes, what's one thing that you always look forward to getting back home?
Just the weather. I mean, you just can't beat it. I mean, it's been cold this week, but it's just so nice. I mean, we're blessed to have, it's not too hot, it's not too cold. The weather, you just can't beat it, you know.
And the food, right?
The food is great. Yeah, the food is great. You bet. And because of the diversity, you can have anything you want. You can have Indian food for dinner, and then for lunch the next day, you can have Japanese food, right? I mean, it's pretty diverse, and it's pretty special. So.
Love it. So, Greg, let's shift gears, and let's talk with Sean about his company.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about what Sims Recycling does? I mean, how do you fit into what we're talking about here?
Sure.
At the RLA convention.
So everything's got an end of useful life. So at the end of the day, your phone, your computer, things in a data center, there's going to come a point where they just don't have a useful life. And so what our company does is we take them and we either try to repurpose it, right, to resell it to have a useful life for something else, or at the end of the day, we'll recycle it. So we'll crush it up into little pieces. We'll separate the plastics from the aluminum, and then recycle each one of those components. So we're an environmental company. You know, we try to extend the useful life of things, but at the end of the day, some things just are done, and then they need to be recycled. And you don't think about it, but with the planned obsolescence of so many different devices, you know, your phone, you're getting a new phone every year. You know, computers are turning over every 3 years. Your box from your cable provider, you know, maybe every 2 years you get a new one. You get a new modem. There's just so much out there. And again, it's planned. It's not happenstance. I mean, it's a planned obsolescence of devices, and they have to go somewhere.
Well, in the pace that technology is growing, there's 100%. Really no way to avoid it, right? I mean,
well, you can't, right? Because, again, think about even if you looked at your phone from 7 years ago, it's ridiculous. It's small. It's
I have
slow.
Looked at it recently, as a matter of fact.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you find that one of the cool things that we have observed, and frankly, I've been part of it, right, as we've learned more and more about sustainability measures, about the importance of recycling. Of course, you know, recycling had a, 70s and 80s and 90s. There was a lot of folks that kind of saw its importance and engaged and leaned in and started doing it. It seems like there's been an even heightened resurgence, especially in industry, about recycling and about sustainability measures. What are you seeing some of that as you have conversations globally?
Yeah, 100%, especially with the scarcity of some resources. Some of the rare earth metals that are used in electronics, you can't just get them anywhere, right?
Right.
So
That's right.
There's a scarcity factor. Consumers are asking for it, right? Consumers are seeing plastics end up in the ocean and in landfills. And so consumers are certainly starting to demand more recyclability. And where reverse logistics fits in, it's always the last mile for recycling, right? Right now, I'm in the business, right? But I've got 5 cell phones in a drawer somewhere, as I'm sure everyone here at the conference has. So the challenge is to figure out how you get things that last mile from the consumer back into the reverse supply chain. So.
How long have y'all been active with the Reverse Logistics Association?
We started when I started with the company in 2012. So, so 8 years.
And it seems like what we've seen, Greg, and having Tony on the show and rubbing elbows with folks here, that some of the world's best companies that have incredible operations are still struggling with many of the basic challenges that recycling and sustainability pose, right?
100%. Because what happens, especially on an international level, the effort to get something into a country, pick Malaysia as an example. So you want to open up a little shop at a consulting office in Malaysia. So you need to buy IT equipment. When you import the material into Malaysia, it's a product, no problem. It goes on a manifest. It's a bill of lading. It's a very simple endeavor, just like shipping something across the street. But in many countries, once that device is past its end of useful life, it's a waste. And so the same discipline, the same effort that went to putting something in country, it's completely different getting something out.
Interesting.
And most companies don't realize. In Malaysia, as a specific example, you have to use a special hazardous waste carrier now, right? Even though it looks the same, it smells the same, right? I mean, that computer looks exactly the same, but because you've deemed it obsolete, it's now a waste. Now, a lot of companies don't treat it as such. Will they get caught? Maybe, maybe not, right? But from a strictly technical standpoint, the big companies who have to play 100% by the rules will now have to treat that as a waste. And when you think about it, it's not when you're opening up a shop, you're opening up that new business, it's really kind of sexy, right? Because you're trying to grow your
Right.
business, and everyone's aligned, and there's big margins, right? There's millions of dollars to buy IT equipment.
Exciting stuff.
It is, right? Because
Yep.
it's all about growth and market share. Getting this stuff out, it's not so sexy, but it's just as important. And like I said, most companies aren't experienced. They're not in the waste business. You know,
Yeah.
if you're an accounting firm, you're not a waste handler, but now you're having to deal with waste in Japan and Malaysia and places like that.
And who really wants to think about what happens when I'm done with this?
Right.
Right. So that's a really good point. So if you think about the companies that you work with, so I always like to ask this question: what's the problem that they often bring to you, or what's a key word? If I'm a company and I'm going, God, I need a solution for this. What's the words that are going through my mind?
That's a great question. How do I get rid of this stuff?
Yeah.
Right. So that and I mean, I am not kidding. We work with a Fortune 38 bank.
Okay.
Right? This is a big company, and they said, well, we have some stuff. We have a data center in Japan. We're going to decommission it. We need some, we want to get rid of it. Well, you can't just get rid of it, right? Because now it's a waste. And the question we ask is, well, before we get started on the project, you tell me, what did you do before with that stuff? And there's always a pregnant pause, right? And
The first thing they're going is, do I need to call a lawyer?
yeah, exactly right. I mean, well, some companies will be honest and say, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Some companies will say, it's fine, right? I've been married for 20 years, so I know when my wife says it's fine, it means it's not fine,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So when a company says it's fine, it means there's something wrong, right?
Yeah.
And some companies will say, listen, we don't want to talk about the past. We only want to move forward.
Yep.
Point being, these are big companies. They've been working internationally for many, many years, and they don't know how to get rid of their stuff in a compliant manner.
But
And
when
it's
you're asking that question, you're not trying to out them.
No,
right?
not
you're
at
just,
all.
You're just trying to get a handle on how mature their offloading process is. Is
That's
that
exactly
kind of
right.
where you're at?
That's exactly
Yeah.
right. We're just trying to establish a baseline,
Yeah.
and we've gotten better to say, hey, whatever the answer is, it's amnesty. Whatever
Yeah.
you say, it's okay. We just want to know how mature your program is.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to start from scratch. Sometimes we have to build upon something. But usually, it's starting from toward the scratch side.
Less than zero sometimes,
betcha.
I'm sure.
You betcha.
I bet you have a recycling maturity step model.
We do. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's not defined. It's,
Right.
it's not 100%, but you have these conversations saying, because there's things like GDPR, right? There's big data
Yes.
protection, and so it's changed. So even if your program was okay 5 years ago, it's not anymore. Interesting to note on GDPR, one of the biggest mistakes we see, it's something called Extraterritorial Scope. What does that mean? Are you guys familiar with it?
No.
A little bit.
I'm
yeah.
not.
So basically, folks think, well, GDPR, it's an EU piece of legislation, right? And they think, well, I'm not doing business in the Netherlands, so GDPR doesn't affect me. It's not the case. GDPR protects the individual.
Right.
So if you are from the Netherlands, and I'm pointing at you, so I don't mean to. If you're from the Netherlands and you're living in California, technically you're protected by GDPR.
Wow.
So I'm a business in California, right?
Right.
I'm the cable company, right? And your data gets out, and you're a Dutch citizen. I'm pointing at you again. Sorry.
And I'm angry.
You're angry. Well, and I'm liable because my job. So it's not the extraterritorial scope means it doesn't matter where the incursion happened. It's where the person who's been harmed is from.
That's right.
And so it's really kind of, it almost says any company of any size is going to have someone from the EU part of it, right?
Well, if you have a website,
Potentially,
you
yeah.
have to potentially cover yourself
Yes.
because literally there are no boundaries. I mean, except in some extreme cases, for someone to be able to get to your site or application. We had an application, and we did business with Amazon, and they might have people from the EU working in the States,
100%.
or people from the States working in the EU with people from the EU. So, and there are some big obligations there, and it's not dissimilar with the kind of products, the obsoleted products that you're talking about.
100%.
So is Sims recycling mostly focused on data and electronics and technology equipment?
Yes.
Is that okay? Because I want to ask you, and y'all might not be as impacted on the big change that China made, I think, in the beginning of 2018.
Oh, yeah. No,
right?
huge.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So we're and to give our audience, the three people that may not know, when China decided to stop taking half of the world's, I believe it's a number, half or maybe bigger than that, waste, in all It didn't have to be pure, and whatever you want to send them.
Right.
That changed dramatically at the beginning of 2018, right?
It does, yeah. It's called different things, but it's typically called the green sword. Like China was tired of being the dumping ground of the world, right? And so they severely limited what could be imported into China. And I've seen it. I've been to places like Guoyan, China, right, where it'll break your heart. You see kids taking apart computers and the quickest way to get gold off a circuit board is you can use acid, and acid will strip, or sorry, not acid, cyanide, and that'll strip the gold off. You precipitate the gold, so now you've got the gold, but what's left over is cyanide. Well, where do you put it? You dump it in a river, right? It's not, I mean, this isn't a fear factor thing. This is real.
Right.
Yeah. And so the green sword was a reaction to that. Now, the problem was it overbroad? It could be. It could be, right? Because there's a lot of legitimate recyclers in China, but unfortunately, some of the material that would go back and forth kind of got caught up in this green sword. So it's impacted the whole industry.
Well, one of the questions I know Greg likes to ask is what's the why? Well, you just answered that in very stark terms.
Yes.
That's the why.
That's the why.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not about just making good use of these materials. It's about assuring that those materials don't turn into a detriment for society.
100%. And
right.
we have a responsibility, right? We're the world's richest country. And for us to have these high-tech products that we all spend so much money on, and then to not have the infrastructure or the will to pay for it and to dump that on people that don't have a tenth of what we have, I think it's irresponsible. That's why we do what we do.
So I think what's also might be helpful context for our listeners that may not be involved in the in this side of industry. I've seen use cases since China made this shift. Green sword, I think, is what you called it.
Green sword, yeah.
So 2 years and some change ago. Cities here in the States, big cities that used to, just prior to this change, would send their waste somewhere and get paid. Not a ton of money, but get paid per metric ton, right? And then China made that change, and then for many of these cities, they went from getting money per metric ton to having to pay to get someone to take it.
Correct.
Right? And some cities that couldn't afford, I can't remember the publication that had this one story of a major city here in the States, rather than paying a third party, they just burnt everything.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that stands, but this is a huge challenge.
It's a huge challenge. And it's a challenge I think we can meet, though, right? I think the biggest problem I see right now with the green sword, and also with some of the trade wars going on with the current administration, is the uncertainty. I think once folks know what can go to China and what can't, then you can build up the infrastructure here to recycle it. But because there's still a bit of uncertainty on how it's going to be applied, there's still a reluctance for someone to say, hey, we're going to spend $100 million doing this because if the floodgates open again in China, well, your investment. But that's one of the things that our parent company, Sims Metals, and what we do is we're not waiting. We're saying, listen, let's get to the challenge. Let's spend the money on capital equipment to make sure that this stuff is highly recyclable. Because, again, it still can go to Southeast Asia, to China. It just has to be in a clean commodity form.
Right.
So it's incumbent upon us to use technology to create clean aluminum, clean plastics, etc.
So are you seeing a big upturn in companies seeking your kind of services? I mean, the awareness of the consumer is so much higher than it used to be.
Right.
And I think that's a relatively new thing. Have you seen any kind of changes other than legal and the disposition of these products? Have you seen any greater demand?
It's better, but it's still not to where it should be. There's still a lot of leakage because if it doesn't go to China, now it's going to go to Africa, right?
Yeah.
So there's always somewhere to send it. So unfortunately, especially in the U.S., it's not necessarily illegal to export the material, right? So right, it's
once
illegal.
you get it in the
Exactly.
country.
So there's still a lot of leakage as far as I'm concerned. So we've seen some. This is where industry's been great. Like we see our enterprise customers willing to spend the money and take the care to do it. We still don't see that in the consumer space. Like people just tend to want it to just go away. And so to answer your question, yeah, we definitely have seen an increase, but not as much as I would have liked.
So consumers are putting pressure on the supply chain, retailers and distributors and manufacturers, to clean up their act, I think is what you're saying, but not sort of following through on that themselves. Is that a fair estimation?
I think that's very fair.
Isn't that ironic?
It's ironic. So we were in Shanghai 2 years ago with Samsung. Hope they don't mind me saying this. and the fella said, of the 18 attributes of a cell phone, recyclability was number 17, right? And so if you're the manufacturer, you can't blame them. They need, their job is to sell more stuff.
Yeah.
And I get it as a capitalist, right? So until consumers vote with their dollars and say, hey, I'm not going to buy that phone because a competitor is highly
more recyclable.
Yep.
It's not going to change. So consumers have to drive it.
So, we had Tony Schroeder on the show with Jack Allen with Cisco.
Sure.
And one of the things we talked about was design for circular economy,
Yes, sir.
Yes.
right? Which is what you're really implying and speaking to. It is fascinating because, to your point, Greg, consumers are holding that they want more transparency. They want to see more and more sustainability. But what are we doing as consumers, right? And what the first thing I think about is, because I had my own, we all have our personal journey. I didn't realize that, glass wasn't as recyclable, or it isn't in our local area now. Some of the things you can't put in the recycling because it'll contaminate all the good stuff you put in your recycling bin.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, maybe I'm a little bit thick-headed, but I didn't realize that 5 years ago.
We just think it just goes to some magical place and everything. I think of bottled water, right? When I grew up, I'm a little older than you guys, I think. I drank out of a freaking hose, right? And so far, I think I'm okay, right?
You're not that much older than me then.
But now we drink bottled water, right?
Yeah.
And we happen to live in a country to where we're lucky to have clean water, but everybody drinks bottled water, which is terrible environmentally, right?
Yep.
And it's just and I do it too. I'm in the business, right? So until we start to, and you start to see a shift. At San Francisco Airport, I think they've banned it, and now we see aluminum bottles, which is better than plastic. But again, it's consumer behavior. We have to demand that type of stuff, and the manufacturers will follow.
Okay, so before we go broader and kind of get your hear what keeps you up at night, kind of in the broader sense across in the supply chain industry. So VP Global Sales and Marketing with Sims Recycling Solutions. You kind of, I think I have a good picture. I can see you having these conversations globally, but where else do you spend your time? That I don't want to make any assumptions. Where do you spend your time in your role?
So not only I manage all the marketing for the company. I manage the entire global sales force, but I also spend a fair bit of time on managing a network. Not me personally, but my team managing a network of subcontractors. Just because what we talked about earlier, the transboundary movement of this material can be really, really tricky. So rather than move something from, say, France to Italy or France to Germany, sometimes it's easier just to find a subcontractor, a vetted and approved subcontractor that can process that material in country. So we manage a whole network of folks that can do that locally. And again, in the States we're spoiled, right, because it's so big, and shipping between California and Nevada, no problem. Not so. Even shipping within some states, in some provinces can be tricky in some places. So to trying to keep things in country or in province is a big part of what we do.
Interesting.
It is interesting. It makes so much. I didn't gather that prior to coming on with the interview, but it makes so much sense. It means increased capacity and capabilities, and ultimately more powerful solutions for the folks, your customers that you serve.
You betcha.
Right? Okay. So, Greg, going broader, I know we're always curious about what we're keeping our finger on the pulse of.
Yeah. So this is where we ask you to break out your crystal ball, right? Let's say. And it doesn't even have to be about reverse logistics or recycling or anything, but think about or share with us some of the things you see that are improving or need to be improved in supply chain today, and whether it's something that's happening now, you've seen in the past, you'd like to see in the future, or you see coming in the future.
Sure.
Share something like that.
The big change we see, and it's I'm not the first guy to say this, is the hyperscale data centers. It's a game changer. I mean, so the amount of data out there, it's measured in exabytes, and I'm not even sure what the heck an exabyte is, right?
Really, really big.
Yeah, it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Big
and
byte.
and so it's not only there's more data, it's the redundancy of data.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of data out there. So your picture of your vacation in Florida, it's stored dozens of times for redundancy. So it's not that there's more data, it's the fact that it's been like I said, redundantly stored.
Duplicated, yeah.
And so it's changed our business where we see more and more material from the data center space. So less and less from the client side. So I was going to pull up my cell phone.
Yeah.
So less and less from what's he doing?
So what's he pulling out?
So less and less stuff from laptops. The turn rate on those are slower because a lot of the heavy computing now is done in the data center side. And just think about that. Think about the old. You're at work, and we would get our IT guy would send out a note that said, "Hey, there's a virus going around. You need to update your software." Well, I'm at lunch or I'm busy, and so maybe 2 hours later I get to it and I upload it, and the whole span from when he discovered it to when I updated my system is 4 hours. That's an eternity now.
Yes.
Right? In the data center space, there's AI. It'll recognize, right? It'll recognize the malware, and before I even know about it, it's already fixed.
Yeah.
Right? It's instantaneous. So the data center space will be huge, and we see it like the amount of volume we see coming from data centers, hard drives is amazing. So
fascinating story. Roger Staubach.
Yes, quarterback
former
Cowboys.
quarterback
Thank
for
you.
the Cowboys, Heisman Trophy winner. He is a major, or has been a major player in the development of these facilities, and they are massive, and they are buying massive amounts of real estate to do that. And it is because of this proliferation of what we call the cloud, and I think everybody understands what the cloud is. It's a bunch of big computers out in buildings elsewhere rather than having to store everything on yours, right? And it does. I could see where it would create this proliferation of products that you guys deal with on a day-to-day basis.
It's a game changer. And again, if you were a company before, you had to have your own IT department. But now the scalability of the cloud, having your own data center may be like having your own power company in the back of your facility, right? Leave it to the big boys, right? They've got the scale to do it. And you just pay by the drink. If you need so much storage space because you're busy around Christmas, you buy that. And then in the summer where you don't need as much, it's 100% scalable.
Yeah.
Which is like what that's how we like buying everything else in this economy, right?
Yeah.
Just in time as we need it.
100%.
Okay, so let's shift gears as we kind of start to wrap up this interview. We're talking with Sean Magann with Sims Recycling Solutions, VP Global Sales and Marketing. It's obviously a big investment y'all have here at the RLA Conference and Expo. Y'all see a lot of value. You've got a team here. I'm not sure if you're speaking at one of the breakout sessions, but been involved for quite some time. What's in today's technology era where we're connecting digitally a number of thousands of ways, driving some of the challenges that you've already spoken to, why is it so important to get out and shake hands and meet people and have these conversations that will be here over the next 2.5 days?
Because it's a collective problem. We're only going to be able to solve it collectively. I know that sounds cliche, but it's true. We're at the back end, right, recycling the material, but we have to figure out a way, that last mile that we talked about. And it's not easy, right? Because, again, when you're shipping a full pallet of material, right, from the manufacturing plant in China to the U.S., it's economized because it's on a pallet, it's shrink wrapped, it's highly efficient. But taking that stuff back from your house and from your house,
especially from his house.
But it's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different ballgame. And so no one's figured out how to do that. No one's cracked the code. We call it even the Zappos problem, right? You buy 5 pairs of shoes and you
Send
return 4
back.
of them. Yeah, exactly, right? I get it. I'm not being critical, but that's new. That didn't exist years ago. And nobody has figured out how to fix that yet.
And the challenge with that, I feel like this has been the common theme through a lot of our shows over the last couple of months. The challenge that so many folks don't understand is that a lot of those, not all of them, but a lot of those shoes, when folks send 4 back, they're being burned. They're being destroyed.
Yeah.
And whether it's shoes or handbags or other products where there's a highly valued brand associated.
Yeah.
These brand retailers, I can understand that they're worried about brand risk.
Right.
And what possibly could be wrong with a product that maybe a team member did not catch before they put it back on the shelf, so to speak. But we've got, as we've talked about on the show, we've got, as consumers, we've got to own this. And even though it's available, and I probably sound like Pollyanna a little bit.
You just made me think of a story.
Okay. But
of course.
You're going to share that story in a second, but we've got to understand the problem, even though it's available to us, and that these retailers make it easy to do it, that we're creating problems on a much bigger scale, especially the repeat offenders, that is just part of their daily or their weekly buying patterns.
Yep.
So please share.
Well, so first you made me think about the juxtaposition of how much better hands, even considering all of that, those shoes are in the hands of Zappos or another brand.
Shoes, you're saying.
Right.
Return shoes. Yeah.
Return shoes. And prolifically, what companies are doing is they're leaving these products in the hands of the consumer, where, as you have mentioned, it's virtually impossible to collect these back.
Right.
Right? So to the story that we were talking about is on the way to the airport, on the way here, my wife was relaying a story to me, and she said, you show me any teenager who wants to clean up the world, and I'll show you a mother who'd like them to start with their room.
There you go. Yeah.
And that's exactly the problem that we have here, right? I mean, we all want the world to be cleaner. We just want it to be somebody else's job,
That's right.
not ours.
That's right.
And I think we have to take the onus upon ourselves to be responsible, to even recognize what the problem is. And I think that's an important thing. I don't know who can close that gap, but for us as consumers to recognize that and be able to do something about it.
Collectively.
So just on that point, because it's a
Yeah.
really, really good point. So our company's part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. It's a mouthful, right? But one of the things we're trying to develop are common metrics. And let me give you an example. So Microsoft, these guys are the leaders in trying to offset carbon, right? And one of the things they do is they assign a cost to the carbon that they generate. And don't quote me on the numbers. I can't remember what it is. But let's say for every pound of carbon you generate in your activities, the company internally will tax you $100. Again, the numbers aren't right. But what that forces you to do, it makes the economics where you can compare two different items, and you can, because right now there's no cost to the consumer. There's no cost to the Zappos just to throw it away. There's nothing to them.
Right.
But if you're at Microsoft and let's say you drive and your boss is trying to figure out, hey, should I give you a pass for the subway or whatever the heck it is, I can make a rational decision because there's a tax on the carbon you generate, right? And so even with consumers, when they compare two different items, the only metric we all agree on is what? Price.
Yep.
Right? But the other considerations aren't in there. So if we could come up with a universal way to measure two different products, and I'm not sure exactly what that is, I think that'll help.
I think ultimately it's going to have to go to the price of the product, and I think that's what some of these initiatives are trying to do.
I think you're right.
When changes in society happen, I mean, this is historic. We all, and many of us, right, rage against the machine and want things to happen, but the truth is when it happens and when we're personally motivated or when we see action occur in mass, it's when it's economically feasible. We talk about this a lot of time.
Yep.
Because it's a rational decision, because everything else is emotional.
Yeah.
Money is money, and you can compare two competing things, and you can make a rational choice, right?
Yep.
So I don't know how you do it. Well, I have some ideas, but I won't bore you with them.
So
Another show.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so let's make sure folks that are listening to this know how to plug. Clearly, you're passionate
I have
about
a
this.
feeling people are going to want to.
Yes. I'm not sure how long you've been doing this, but as you share your thought leadership, it comes across like you're on a mission. And so how can folks plug in with Sims Recycling? What's the best place to find more information or connect with y'all?
I appreciate that. So we're on LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn, you can find me at Sean Magann. Our website is simsrecyclingsolutions.com. Again, my team runs the website, or you can just look under the Sims Group, which is our parent company. All our salespeople are on social media, so just look for Sims Recycling Solutions, and you'll find me or one of my sales teams.
Great.
So,
Outstanding.
Yeah.
I wish we had more time.
I appreciate
I
it.
find it fascinating. Sean Magann, Sims Recycling Solutions, VP Global Sales and Marketing.
should I give my cell phone, or is that not cool?
We have had people do that. I'd just like to warn you that 2,000 or 3,000 people will listen to this.
Okay.
So
Well,
it's
The bots will be after you, man.
Yeah.
How about
right.
my email address? How's
Yeah,
that?
that's great. That's great.
It's Sean, SEAN .MAGANN, Sean.McGann at Sims, SIMS, MMMaryMary.com. And if you remember all that, then you really want to talk to me.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Right.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Fantastic. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Learn more about Sims Recycling and sitting down with you, Sean. Thanks for carving some time out.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. So sit tight for just a second. We're going to wrap up this episode on just a couple of quick announcements. We love to invite our audience to come out and check us out. And we're here for the next 2.5 days.
Yeah.
Where will we be next, Greg. Quiz question.
Yes, next we'll be at the bar, and then shortly after that, the next show that we're doing is Modex in Atlanta, the Georgia World Congress Center, March 9th to the 12th. 35,000 of your closest friends from supply chain. Amazing facilities being mocked up and built there. Tonka toys for supply chain geeks, as I like to say.
Who knows? We might see Sims Recycling there.
Absolutely.
Who knows?
Yeah.
And it's free to attend. Modexshow.com, free to attend, 35,000 people. And they're hosting what, Greg?
They are hosting the Atlanta Supply Chain Awards. So brought to you by our friends at Supply Chain Now. And a number of other good folks. I mean, we've got a ton of sponsors, attendees, and nominations, though we have 11 days left for nominations. So if you think you're deserving, if you really think you're doing something good for the supply chain, for society, nominate. Don't be shy.
Yes.
Self-nominate. So that's the 10th, right?
Yeah,
10th from
10th,
10 to 1:30.
That's right. And a big requirement there is even regardless where you're globally headquartered, all you have to have is some kind of presence or operation in the Metro Atlanta area, which is
29 counties.
It's huge. Okay.
If you ever wonder why traffic is horrible in Atlanta, ask anyone.
Modexshow.com, free to attend, AtlantaSupplyChainAwards.com. For more information on that event. And then AIAG, we've got 2 events coming up there, Automotive Industry Action Group, Corporate Responsibility Summit. I bet we're going to be talking about some of the things you've shared here today, Sean. That's going to be in Michigan, April 28th and 29th. And then their Supply Chain Summit, also in Michigan, June 9th. We'll be there broadcasting live all 3 days. And then finally, AME.
Yeah, AME is
event.
May 4th to the 7th. That's their 2020 Lean Summit. Still hard to say 2020, isn't it? And that's where people are getting together talking about Six Sigma, Lean, all of those good practices in manufacturing. So
continuous improvement, lots of passion. Just like on this show, a lot of passion in the world of manufacturing, continuous improvement, Lean.
Is Bo going to be there?
Bo, I bet, will be there.
I bet.
Bo Groover at the Effective Syndicate.
When you said passion
for
Six Sigma and Lean and continuous improvement, Bo Groover came into my head immediately. Yeah.
All right. So big thanks to our guests here today, Sean Magann, Sims Recycling Solutions. Really enjoyed the conversation. Check out other upcoming events, past shows, you name it, at supplychainnowradio.com. You can also find us wherever you get your podcast from, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or
Google Podcasts.
Okay. You're switching up on me.
YouTube.
Yes. But regardless, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. On behalf of the entire team, Scott Luton here today. Stay tuned as we continue our live coverage of the Reverse Logistics Association Conference and Expo. Thanks, everybody.
Go Chiefs.
Thank you.